final speaker of this session, we have Dr. Ajit Ranade. Now, when you read Dr. Ranade's profile, it is amazing, the kind of achievements that he has had and the kind of things that he has created. So let me just, in a summary, tell you about Dr. Ajit Ranade, who is presently the Vice Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. The Gokhale Institute is a 94-year-old institution and a deemed university under the UGC Act of the Government of India. Dr. Ranade's 34-year career has spanned both academic and corporate assignments. Prior to the Gokhale Institute, he was the Group Vice Executive President and the Chief Economist with the Aditya Birla Group, an Indian multinational corporation. Dr. Ranade has been a member of the executive committees of the Apex Industry Chambers, the CII, the FICCI, and the MCCIA. After his PhD, Dr. Ranade has taught at universities in the US, in India, and has published a large number of articles in many scholarly journals. Dr. Ranade is the co-author of the book Rising to the China Challenge, which was published in 2021. He is also the co-founder and trustee of the Association for Democratic Reforms, a citizen watchdog body. He's a trustee of the Pune International Center and an honorary senior fellow at the Takshila Institute. Dr. Ranade received his PhD in economics from the Brown University, and he's received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the IIT Bombay in 2009. Dr. Ranade, may I request you now.
Thank you, General, for the very kind introduction, and I'm happy to be a tail ender in these brilliant sessions that we have had. I want to remind everybody that Mr. Ashwin, our Ashwin, actually scored more test centuries than many people, so I'll try to do some job as a tail ender. But I want to thank the Army Commander for inviting me and, of course, organizing this session, these sessions, two sessions. Really, I found them absolutely brilliant and insightful. And I want to say that these are ideas, we are talking about ideas and insights which we are sharing, but I hope each one of you will multiply them or amplify them 100 times or 1,000 times, because each one of you is a leader in society and these should get out. I know that you said, Mr. Sharma, you said ki Chatham House rules. Chatham House rules doesn't mean secrecy, by the way. Chatham House rules simply means that you don't attribute a statement who said what. But ideas are important. They should not be confined in this room. There are some excellent ideas we have shared. They should be, I think, the commander's speech should be put on YouTube. So please, Chatham House rules just means that don't attribute it to Mr. Sharma or Mr. Shankar. I want to just to illustrate the importance of Chatham House rules, because आज का ज़माना ऐसा है कि the moment you say कि ये गुलजार साहब ने कहा या रामचंद्र गुहा ने कहा, you just turn your ears off, because so and so has said it, so it must be not true. But if you just give the statements, I'm going to read out a statement. A person said, in light of the fact that a recent High Court judge resigned and immediately joined a political party, and another Supreme Court Chief Justice got a Rajya Sabha seat and all, इस ज़माना ऐसा है, तो एक साहब ने कहा कि there are, among the judges, there are those who know the law and those who know the law minister. And judges' verdicts are influenced by post-retirement jobs. So if I just say it in the Chatham House rules spirit, you'll say, हाँ ये तो सही कहा है, मतलब ये तो कोई कांग्रेसी आदमी ने कहा होगा. But I hope all of you know who said this statement in Parliament, actually. Anyway, so that's on Chatham House. Second thing is, my remarks, and I'll definitely try to fit, I'll be very brief. I'm going to talk about the economy, actually. We have heard a lot about geopolitics. We have heard a lot about military, armed forces, security concerns, technology. But I'm just going to confine my remarks about the economy. Some of it, of course, has come in Mr. Vijay Gokhale's in his remarks. But I want to also tell you that one of the most outstanding economists of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, who was, of course, responsible for the setting of the Bretton Woods institutions, much maligned today and perhaps need to be reformed. He said a very famous statement, said, ultimately, it is not the power of vested interests or large industrialists or corporate interests which will prevail. It is the power of ideas. So when, Army Commander, when you have these sessions, please don't underestimate the very big influence of these ideas that are being shared and discussed here. So it's the power of ideas which will ultimately prevail. And I want to particularly pay tribute to General Sharma for his very free and frank views, which I found them extremely insightful and refreshing. So I'm going to, I want to begin before by referring to Mr. Gokhale's comments again. I think generally the tenor so far has been ki, let's confront reality. We have challenges. And I hope a little tinge, I mean, I'm happy to be proved wrong, but I thought a tinge of thoda sa, kya bolte hain, apprehension, if not cynicism, I could feel. So I want to again remind you that when we talk about Bharat or India in 2047, the reason we are focusing on that date is because 1947 is important. And 1947 is the formation of a modern state in modern times. So that's why we are giving importance to that date. And this creation of this modern nation state, which became we got independence in 47, we became a republic in 52. I always like to think of it as, in 47, we got freedom. In 52, we got responsibility. 52, we made rules among ourselves, how we are going to behave among ourselves. What are going to be the rules of conduct? So this modern nation is unique because in terms of every conceivable dimensions of diversity, religion, culture, ethnicity, cuisine, race, whatever you call it, it's so diverse. And not only have we survived as one nation in 75 years, with not 14, 18 transformations of power at the Lok Sabha level and several dozens at the state level in a largely peaceful manner. No bloodshed. This transfer of power, 18, now the 18th time will happen in a few months. So not only have we survived as one nation, actually we have flourished. Life expectancy in 47 was about 35 or 37 years old, 37 years. Today it is 69. And what to speak about the size of the economy? The fact that we gave every adult person, one vote, what is called adult suffrage, Hindu or Muslim, rich or poor, man or woman, was unthinkable, was an unthinkable idea at that time. People said this nation is going to break up. Of course, you don't even have to go to Mr. Churchill, who was no fan or friend of India, but a lot of friends of India were concerned that this nation is just going to break up. Just no way with this kind of diversity, illiteracy, and poverty, you're going to survive. And of course, all these kind of divisive forces, but we have survived. Not only that, if you look back in 47, how many members of the United Nations or the general, before that the League of Nations? Today, the number of members in the United Nations has gone up perhaps by 50%. From 150 or so, we have 200 members. So it's not that the Earth suddenly discovered new real estate. Countries broke up. The Soviet Union broke up in 10 pieces recently. Our own neighbor, our twin, which was born on the same day, broke up into two. As recently as a few years back, a new country called South Sudan was born. So these kind of secessionary forces, divisive forces, are there in all parts of the world. So the fact that a country which is 1/7 of humanity has survived in one piece is nothing but a modern miracle. So let's actually not just acknowledge it, but we have to celebrate it. But we can't be satisfied with it. We should aspire much more. So the talk is always about the future, but just a little glance back. When you're climbing a mountain, at Camp 3, Camp 4, those of you know, but you got to once in a while look down where Camp 1 was. You're at Camp 6 now. There's still tough, it's very tough and challenging task ahead. But please remember, we came from Camp 0. So that's important to remember when you talk about India. And also to learn from what are the core elements of this democracy that are our strength. So I don't know if this is this is a very quick economy lesson because I'm going to focus on the internal. Most of my discussion is going to be confined to the domestic aspect. So The economy, think of it as a black box. There's a black box, it gets some inputs and it gets some outputs. Very simplistic economic 001 discussion. So the inputs are called labor and capital or technical know-how. And the output is called GDP, what we call GDP. And, or you call it national output, you call it standard of living or national income. Incidentally, just to remind you, and I hope Mr. Gokhale will agree, they used to say that India's best foreign policy, the most optimum foreign policy for India is 8% growth, 8% growth, 8% growth. They also are recently saying that India's best security policy is 8% growth, 8% growth, 8% growth. What I mean to say is that economic growth is seen as absolutely essential for whatever security strategies we have for the future, for the next 20 years or even longer. So having a strong economy, which means that growing in a sustainable and relatively high pace, and where the benefits of growth are somewhat spread to all sections of society, that is kind of absolutely essential to whatever strategy we want about security in the changing world. I mean, yesterday I was telling the army commander that it may not be sufficient, I agree with that, but it's absolutely essential. So it's necessary, but may not be sufficient. So I'm just talking about how this economy will grow. What are the ingredients for such an economy to grow? So a simple way to think about a large economy like this is it's a black box. It takes in inputs and it produces output. The inputs are labor and capital. The output is GDP, we call it. So the input in terms of labor and capital, in simpler words, is labor is nothing but our demography, our labor force. So our labor force is still expanding at the rate of 2.5% per year, 2.2 maybe. Our population is growing only at 1% or 1.1. Many of our states, we have 29 states, I think, half the states are already at zero population growth rate conditions, which is called the TFR, total fertility rate, which is if an average number of children born to a woman of childbearing age, if it's 2.1 or below, that's called replacement rate because it's 2.1 and not 2.0 because some infants die early. So the average number of children when a woman has more than 2.1, you say you're actually going to grow at 0%. You're going to grow population at higher than 0%. But we are already below that in many states of India. In many parts of the world, from all the Scandinavian countries, Germany, Japan, even China, they're now facing negative population growth rate. So demography is an advantage because labor is an input, if you agree, labor is an input to GDP. And that window is of course limited. Then we have capital, which which in simpler terms is to think of it as savings rate of the aggregate savings rate of Indian economy is about 20% or 25%. And that is relatively high and that's going to provide the capital. Whatever capital shortage is there, we get it from foreign sources called FDI, foreign direct investment. Then you have technical know-how, which is productivity growth, which will depend on R&D spending. I'll talk a little bit about it later. And let's not forget that the most sustainable ingredient for GDP growth is the quality of human capital. When I say human capital, it means education, skilling, it means the health of people. So all that is captured in human capital. Sorry, next, yeah. So as we think about India's growth prospects for the next 20, 30, 40 years, we cannot forget the lessons of growth from East Asia. Okay, I know that conditions are changing, AI is changing the way we think about manufacturing itself. It was mentioned earlier that India's share of manufacturing in our GDP is unfortunately stagnating at only 15 or 16%. My favorite question to an audience is that in 1991, we had a crisis year. That was the year of reforms, and we suddenly opened up everything, especially industrial delicensing was the biggest decision we made, and we opened up manufacturing. So therefore, we have come 30 years from then where we completely opened up manufacturing. So can you tell me that can you imagine how pathetic our manufacturing share must have been in GDP back in 91? What's the answer to that question? The answer is 16%. So after economic reforms in 30 years, or 33 years now, the share of manufacturing is stubbornly stuck at 16% when it should be closer to 22 or 25%. In some of the East Asian countries, it's 35%. So I'm saying we should, what are the lessons to be learned? We don't have enough time to that, but so quickly, bullet-wise, export orientation is an absolute must. So even if you're thinking that the world is heading towards deglobalization, that news is premature, sir. I don't believe in that. There may be a little hesitation in some, it may be a little bit backtracking perhaps, but globalization is not going away. So therefore, India has to focus on export markets. We cannot grow, no country can grow without accessing export markets, including a $6 trillion consumer economy called China. China has a $6 to $7 trillion consumer economy. They don't manufacture all that in China. They import, somebody mentioned that 150 countries, the biggest trading partner is China. When you say trading partner, sir, it means exports and imports. China is also one of the largest importers in the world, and it's not just crude oil and raw materials. So why are we ignoring a $6 trillion consumer economy? Can we not get 1% share of that, or maybe 2% share? So export orientation is important. Labor-intensive exports are important. But this we'll talk a little bit later. I don't know if we'll have time, because now they say an Adidas shoe, leather, footwear, textiles were supposed to be the key sectors for labor-intensive exports. But now they say an Adidas shoe can be made without a human hand touching it, or a shirt can be stitched, garmenting. So we'll need to talk about those things. But I think ultimately labor-intensive exports are important. Remember, this story has been repeated starting with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, of course China, and even after China, Vietnam. So this story, we cannot just brush it aside that there is nothing from this story that we can learn. This story is important for our growth story. And of course, now there is talk, I think recently, that India needs to perhaps forget about manufacturing and directly leapfrog to services. I'm not so sure I don't quite agree with that. But perhaps we can see, the fact is that when the WTO was born in 1995, they did not think of services as being a very major tradable sector. You know, you can export steel and you can export cars, but can you export haircuts? But in fact, you can export haircuts. But anyway, but services exports we cannot ignore, but I don't quite think that you can ignore manufacturing. Illustrative story of Japan, I just want to say that because today they say Japan has been stagnating for the last 30 years. You know, the Japanese GDP growth since 1990 has been 0%. So people say, my God, but remember, it is still the third or fourth largest economy in the world. The per capita income of Japan is still among the top 5 in the world. This is an OECD country which has the lowest rate of heart disease. It has the lowest rate of obesity, which is the bane of countries like America. It has the highest forest cover, green cover. It has the highest rainfall, which is connected to green cover and forests. So what is it about Japan? It is still the leader in things like miniaturization, perhaps in renewable energy, in robotics. It's not, you know, we talk about China, but let's not forget Japan. There's something to be learned from Japan. It is, so this is an illustrative story. Don't write off Japan saying this. Somebody mentioned that Germany and Japan ka kya hoga? Arre, utna to pahunche hum log Japan tak. And then, of course, AI, I said this, the big revolution that's going to happen. See, for a long time, they thought internet, then automation, computerization is going to have high productivity impact on the economy, but they could not find it. Our bank computerization in India started in 1980s, and we have had internet and everything. But for a long time, at least in Western economies also, they could not find a significant impact of productivity, on productivity of ICT, 40 years. But now this AI, people suspect, some people are sure, some people are apprehensive that this is actually going to have a big impact on productivity. It is going to reverse the productivity slowdown in the West. So India has to be prepared for this. This is really, it's going to be quite significant. So India's major drivers of growth are, I'll just quickly list them. Urbanization, we are about 30%, 35% urbanized, whereas most countries, including China, you know, the West is at 90%, 85%, China is about 60. So even a 10% increase in our urbanization, because our GDP is produced in urban areas, let's accept that. If you look at India's GDP, 60 to 70% of our GDP and high growth rates are because of urbanization, not in rural areas. In fact, our poverty is confined to rural areas and in agriculture. So urbanization is a big driver of growth. It does not depend, all these factors are structural factors. They don't depend on business cycles or weather cycles or even political cycles or electoral cycles. These are structural features. Urbanization, demography, I just mentioned that. Renewable energy, the fact that India has committed itself very strongly to increasing the share of renewable energy, perhaps to 30–40%. I think this has India imports crude oil worth about $180 billion every year, $200 billion. Imagine the impact it will have if we can reduce that even by 50%. And there is a possibility that in the next 20–30 years, with a combination of hydrogen and solar and perhaps nuclear, this can have a big impact on the economy. Then, of course, the digital economy. the big infrastructure push, because the kind of, we are seeing the expenditures on airports, roads, highways, all kinds of urban infrastructure, especially urban infrastructure, metros, that also is a driver of growth. You know, in Mumbai, right next to Mumbai, they're building a brand new city called Naina, I think. So many such projects, this is a big driver of growth. Again, as I said, it doesn't really depend on the government or the business cycle. And exports, this is something we'll talk about later, because I think export is a very important driver of growth. But let's talk about it later. What are the challenges? Number one, so each of them I've just said, urbanization is very important, but we now have to do it with our net zero ambition. See, by the way, people think that the contribution to carbon dioxide comes from, let's say, motor cars, or, you know, but actually construction is a very major contributor to CO2, I mean, to the carbon footprint. So how can we do rapid urbanization, but at the same time reduce carbon footprint? That's going to be a challenge. Demography. You know, our demography is a very big advantage, but our female participation in the labor force is very low. It's the lowest among G20, even lower than Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is changing now, but I think this is a challenge. How do we get women to participate more in the labor force? When I say labor force, of course women are working, but most of them are doing unpaid work. Only 1 in 5 women, working age women, actually gets paid for work in India. Maybe it's now slightly higher, 20%, 22, 23%. So 4 women are working without pay. Maybe at work, maybe care of the elderly or children, or on the farm. There's a lot of farm labor, by the way. Women are on the farm, but not getting paid. Digital economy, our challenges have been mentioned actually in all these presentations, because our proprietary network technology spread and so on. You know, when they say that 2G, even today, 200 million Indians do not have access to 3G, 4G, 5G. 200 million. That's more than the population of most, it's like it would be the 5th or 6th largest country. So we can't just switch off. We can't say कि Vodafone and Airtel अगर मर जाएंगे तो ठीक है, Jio will take care. अरे Jio has only 4G. Jio is only broadband. Jio does not give any 2G services. So today, even today, so while we are proud of our achievements in telecom, remember even today 200 million Indians do not have anything but 2G. Fiscal capacity, you know, the fiscal situation of we have to pay attention to fiscal situation. And then exports, we have talked a lot, I mean, it was mentioned, PLI and so on. So these are the challenges. The importance of reforms. So very quickly, see, we keep talking about agriculture, and these 3 farm laws were tabled in Parliament in September 2020, even though agriculture is a state subject, actually. It's not a union government subject. But we keep talking about agriculture. Agriculture is, you know, even as we speak now, there are this agitation outside Delhi of farmers and so on. I think the main problem with agriculture is that the solution lies outside agriculture. You know, large surveys reveal that farmers will gladly, 40% of them will gladly leave farming if only there's a secure and quality job available in industry or services. The children of farmers, most of them don't want to go back to farming. So let's recognize that agriculture is a large area which is still unreformed and which is not, I mean, we keep doing, I can spend an hour on this, but agriculture is one area where we really need reforms. And somebody mentioned, in early 1970s, India used to have 71 million parcels of land, agricultural land. Today it is 145 million. So dugna ho gaya, matlab kya? Fragmentation. Every successive generation land is 5 minutes. Yes. So every successive generation land keeps fragmenting, and that reduces the productivity of land. That reduces. So it's just. But the solution largely lies outside agriculture. Judicial reforms. It was mentioned. You know, we say we are a $5 trillion economy. I want to remind you, we are also a 5 crore economy. What are 5 crore? Pending cases. There are 50 million pending cases in the Indian judicial system and rising. What is the pendency for criminal cases in a country like United States? Answer is 0. Why? Because when a case goes to trial, 90% probability that the defendant will lose. In India, when the case goes to trial, look at it, acha. Then they sigh of relief. Finally, I got the case in court, now to chalega 10 saal. Because the machinery, it's not the judiciary, the investigation, the police, the preparation that goes up to the trial. So this is a big reform that, then of course electoral reforms, transparency, inner party democracy. You know, Mr. Obama in 2006 was a nobody. I mean, he was there, he was a senator from a state called Illinois. he had to fight eight contestants. Ultimately, the last one he had to defeat was Hillary Clinton to get the nomination from his own party to get a ticket to be the candidate in 2008 elections. This is the way leaders rise. Even in China, I must mention that Zhu Rongji or whoever has risen to the top, they start off as by mayor of a big city or maybe a head of a province. So this stepping stone of career, political careers. Importance of institution, 73rd and 74th Amendment. I think there's no magic bullet, but the big thing is decentralization, decentralization, decentralization. We passed a landmark amendment in Parliament 30 years ago called the 73rd and 74th Amendment, where the third tier of government is supposed to be empowered in terms of funds, functions, and functionaries. It has not happened even after 30 years because, there's so much premium on power. So Marathi मध्ये म्हणतात सत्तेचे राजकारण. Politics of power. It's not politics of ideology. It's of all politics of कुछ भी करके हम power में रहेंगे, and then we'll do good for the country. But we have to remove that premium on power. Why is I'm new to Pune, but I find all the Marathi newspapers, 60% of the news are only about MLAs and MPs and corporators, and there's no news of, say, scientific discoveries or drones, or because the premium on power is very high, therefore it's not given up. But we have passed a parliament amendment. If landmark, we should implement that. Importance of institutions, I think I'm running out of time, so 2 more minutes. Concluding remarks. Is demography our destiny? I'll just leave those questions. Is democracy a hurdle? How to build a foundation of trust? Because nowadays, there's this whole Bush doctrine, you're either with us or against us. That means lack of trust, complete breakdown of trust, whether it is between, the language also used is of war. When you have domestic, political competition should be like a football match or a cricket match. Match चलेगी बहुत जोर से लड़ेंगे. जब referee का final 90 minutes whistle आएगा, game is over now. Okay, this team has won. So चलिए, ऐसा नहीं है. It's like after the match is over, also people are playing the game, and with metaphors of war and how we'll kill and this. So this is foundation of trust. So Adam Smith is supposed to be the founder or father of modern capitalism or capitalist economies, who wrote a famous book called The Wealth of Nations in 1776, coincidentally also the year when Americans got their independence, because America is considered to be the the icon or the prime example of capitalist economy. But he actually wrote a book 17 years before that, and he claimed that was his more important book. And that's where he talked about trust and morals, and that is called the theory of moral sentiments. So anyway, I should I think we need to think about India's destiny. The concluding thought is, they say 2 things I like to say. One is that India always ends up doing the right thing, but after trying out everything else. So that's why we are at 6% and not 8%. And another thing that they say about India is a land with a great future and shall always remain so. So thank you very much.